J.G. Ballard, more than any other writer that I read and enjoy, you seem to me to invent worlds in your books. Where does all this stuff come from?
Well, I'm an imaginative writer, obviously, and I think to be able to exercise an imagination over a long period of time, as I have done, one's got to be very well stocked in one's childhood with experiences of a pretty radical kind. And I think I was fortunate in my own case that I did have an extraordinary childhood. I think if my parents had decided, say, not to go out to China in 1929, and I'd been born in a suburb of Manchester, I might never have become a writer at all. It's very hard to say. But I think in my own case, the very strange and exhilarating, and in some ways very cruel world that Shanghai was, fed my imagination.
I'd like to come back to that later and ask you, since you live in this world, what sort of world do you think we live in? I mean, how is it different from the world in which a 19th century writer wrote in?
Well, I think the main difference is, of course, that we have firstly a communications landscape, what I call a media landscape, dominated by television, the international press, by film, which is, and radio, of course, which is saturates our environment and creates really a kind of two-tier world in which we all live. On the one hand, there's the ordinary world of the streets and the offices and the factories that we move around in. But then there's above this, there's this global umbrella which has now sealed itself around the planet and virtually created a secondary reality. And there's constant leakage between the two. I mean, one could almost say that the media landscape of the present day is a sort of a map in search of a territory. I mean, the great television companies of the world, great news organizations, are constantly hunting about, trying to find something in ordinary, everyday reality which will match their expectations. And they tend to latch on to great disasters or confrontations of any kind and magnify them enormously, whether it's...
How do you use this secondary world in your books? Do you describe it, or are you predicting changes in it, or are you using it as your subject matter in some way?
I think I do both, because I began as a science fiction writer, and I think all science fiction writers have a sort of cautionary streak in their natures. They're rather like volunteer road sign painters. People have accused me and accused most science fiction writers of being rather pessimistic because they're always warning of dangers ahead. But I think if a sign painter who paints a sign saying dangerous bends ahead, slow down, isn't a pessimist. I mean, he's merely giving an accurate warning of,
You don't think you're writing dangerous bends ahead, speed up?
Yes. Of course, I am, actually, in some of my books. I mean, paradoxically, Crash is a dangerous bends ahead, speed up book. But that's because I feel that there are a lot of ambiguities in the modern communications landscape which reflect ambiguities in our own natures, and that these need to be explored. And we too easily assume that violence is bad for us, say, on television screens. That
you think it's good for us?
I think the truth is good for us. And I think that attempts to suppress, say, all violent imagery are doomed to failure. I mean, there is a violent streak in human nature and the human imagination. The sexual imagination is a limitless fund of wayward, metaphors and ideas. One can't repress that either.
So in a book like Crash, which uses car accidents and fatalities in car accidents as a sort of sexual or sexually provoking imagery, you're saying that it's a good thing, apart from the readability of the book and people's enjoyment of it, you're saying it's a good thing to be able to take these horrors, automobiles ploughing into our flesh, and give them some sort of, put them where we can live with them.
Yes, I think our ambivalent feelings about events like car crashes or disasters in everyday life should be brought out into the open.
You mean we actually want these things to happen?
No, we're not excited by. I mean, we're not sexually excited by car crashes, obviously. But people are drawn to disasters. They don't enjoy violence on their TV screens or in their films, but they are drawn to them because I think they feel that the sort of secret formulas of our lives are in some way revealed in these tragic events. And there's nothing necessarily ghoulish about it. And I think it's a mistake to try to suppress that ambiguous response that we all feel. And, I mean, a crash is a kind of extreme hypothesis about the dangers that modern technology have created. They've allowed us, perhaps, to play with our own. I'm thinking particularly of television and videos and home video systems and our accessibility to an enormous range of violent imagery in the world around us, which is fed into our homes constantly. People have this enormous access, and I think we've got to see we've got to immerse ourselves in the most destructive element, as Conrad said, and see if we can swim. And the most destructive element, of course, is ourselves. Modern technology has created the possibilities for our own psychopathologies to play with almost unrestricted freedom. That could be extremely dangerous, but it's worth exploring.
But could it turn some of us into dangerously nasty people? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I think they already are. Those already are dangerously nasty. I mean, one must remember that, within a 1,000 miles of where we're sitting now, or not much more, say a two-day drive from here, this century, tens of millions of people have been killed, millions of them put to death in the most cruel way. Well, that you can't attribute that simply to sort of vagaries of history or to the behavior of a small gang of, political psychopaths. These elements lie in human nature, and perhaps modern technology is bringing them out and is facilitating them in a dangerous way. Crash is an example of an attempt to understand what may be going on, using the car crash as a sort of central metaphor.
Let's go back to your childhood in a China which was subject to the violence of invasion and massacre, like what you're talking about in Europe. What are the images that stick with you of that?
Well, from a very early age, I was born in 1930, I remember Shanghai vividly as a huge, exhilarating, but brutal city. Millions of Chinese flocked there in the 1930s from the outlying countryside where famine was rife, civil war was rife. And, of course, there was absolutely no social security of any kind. If you fainted from hunger and fell to the pavements of Shanghai, which must have been the hardest pavements in the world, you lay there and died. And I mean, it was quite common when I went to school in the morning to see the bodies of dead people lying by the roadside, or the coffins of small children and adults placed by the roadside. Trucks would drive around Shanghai every day, collecting the bodies of people who died overnight. And it was a cruel and brutal place. There's certainly no doubt about that. I mean, it was a place where anything went. At the same time, it had the tremendous freedom for the imagination to soar. And I was,